This is Conservation and Science podcast, where we take a deep dive into topics of ecology, conservation, and human-wildlife interactions. I'm Tommy Serafinsky, and I always strive to bring you diverse perspectives on environmental stories that I cover, and what that means is that I talk with people who express opinions that are often on the opposing sides of an environmental debate. And why I'm doing this? Because we need more dialogue and understanding and less fighting and division. That's why. So essentially, I'm trying to at least some of you to listen to voices you wouldn't have listened to otherwise. Today, our guest is social anthropologist Thorsten Gieser, who is a research associate in the European Research Council project BOR. That's B-O-A-R. And Thorsten is one of the co-authors of a wonderful paper titled Recreational Killing of Wild Animals Can Foster Environmental Stewardship. And I was wondering, what are those conditions under which killing of animals can foster environmental stewardship? And I understand that reading scientific paper may be a daunting prospect to some of you. And besides, this paper is not open access. At least it wasn't when it came out. I had to use my connections to get this sent to me. Thanks, Tom. That's Professor Tom Cameron. And so after reading this paper, I thought that, we need to dive deeper into that. And that's what we are going to do with Thorsten on this episode of the podcast. So I make it easy for you. Oh, of course, shout outs to Professor Erika von Essen, who is also one of the co-authors of this paper and who was our guest on the episode 163 of this podcast. And Erika put me in touch with Thorsten. So thanks, Erika, for your help in making this episode happen. And finally, before I wrap this introduction, if you still want to read the paper, the link to the paper as well as Thorsten's profile are in the description of this show. All right? Enjoy the show. Thorsten, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tommy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you. And look, man, we have a topic that I wanted to cover for some time, and then the paper showed up that you are one of the co-authors that is titled Recreational Killing of Wild Animals Can Foster Environmental Stewardship. I think I got it right. I got it from memory. And some people who are going to read that title, their heads are going. Although that's an argument that is quite often brought by hunters or farmers and so on and so forth. So let's do what we always do in this podcast. Let's jump right in and tell us how killing of wild animals can foster environmental stewardship or virtue or connection with the environment.
So basically in this article, which is not kind of a standard article that just summarizes the findings of a particular study, but it's a so-called perspective article, which means we're trying to think new ways and trying to make sense of hunting in a new way. So we're basically, with that article, trying to promote new kinds of research and suggesting kind of new interesting avenues, because we think there are a lot of indications that go in that direction and that tell us that there's something really interesting going on. But actually, there's also a lot more research that we need to do on these issues. So basically, our starting point was that, first of all, as you said, killing animals is a really difficult topic. It's a really ethical topic. And so the starting point basically is that for us, kind of killing animals is always something problematic. Why? Because it's usually messy. Messy in the sense that we can't really completely control the killing of the animal, and especially not in a hunting context. Yeah, even in the killing of domestic animals in a slaughterhouse, it's supposed to be in human control, but we all know that often it isn't. Kind of the clean death, the sudden death without any pain and so on isn't ideal. But killing is always a challenge, basically, that one has to deal with and has to overcome and has to develop the necessary skills. So it's always a difficult and an ambiguous and a complex experience for those who need to do the killing. Yeah, and therefore it's something that is a particular experience that does something to the one who kills. Yeah, it doesn't leave anyone cold who does the killing. Yeah, and also killing is not just coming. You don't just have the, let's say, a dead animal there in the end, but you also witness and experience kind of the dying of the animal, which is a large part of it. You might also experience the animal in pain, or the wounded animal, a suffering animal. So if you are a hunter and kill on a regular basis, that will happen at some point. Yeah. So that's all kind of the part of this complex experience of killing animals. And that gives us an indication. And then also what is special about hunters also is kind of they experience really themselves as the source of that killing and of that potential pain and dying of the animal. Yeah, so they're deeply implicated, and they experience themselves as being deeply implicated in this dying animal, and that kind of makes room for a really intense emotional experience, quite a conflicting experience. So there might be many emotions involved in that. This might be experiences of relief when you actually manage to kill cleanly, for example, that you're happy that it's over and that it's done. You sense of relief maybe, but there's also this cringe feeling that you're an animal's dying now because of you, yeah, and you're the one who killed it. So there are a lot of conflicting emotion going on, and what we're saying is that conflicting emotions that take place in killing, that gives kind of a space for hunters actually to reflect on what they're actually doing. Yeah, so they're not an outsider to hunting. They're not an outsider to wildlife management. They're not making decisions from somewhere outside from a desk and kind of giving or making decisions about what's to happen elsewhere. But they are really right there. They're right there in an encounter with an animal, and they're actually the ones who have to do it. Yeah, and so this reflection of what they are doing and what the consequences of their doings are, this, we argue, gives space for hunters to develop certain virtues. Yeah, and virtues such as temperance, compassion, patience. Also, perhaps to decenter yourself as a human being and not making everything about yourself. So there's an opportunity actually that killing has an effect and transforms the hunter. And the question is kind of what are the conditions actually that this positive effect of killing might take place, and what are conditions that actually distract the hunter actually from taking that reflective moment and develop these virtues, because it could go either way. Yeah? And we know there are kind of good hunters, there are bad hunters, there are virtuous hunters and not so virtuous hunters. So a lot of things can go awry at this point. Yeah, and we say if they really take the moment, if the conditions are right, if they develop these virtues that can be fostered through killing, then this might be the kind of person who become good environmental stewards because they are implicated in the ecology of what's happening at a particular place and with the animals involved. Yeah, so they are involved. They are part of that web of relations that they have established through hunting and killing. Yeah, and that makes a particular kind of a good steward, which might be something else than being a good manager. But that's perhaps something else that we can talk about. But this kind of in a larger nutshell is what the argument of the paper is about.
This is excellent, because this is exactly great jumping off point, and there's like so many things I would like to now dig in deeper into more specific things. I want to pick first on the term that you use in the paper, tug of regret during killing. And that is an argument that is very often brought up by people who are opposed to hunting. Know that I'm not using anti-hunters. It's like slightly different flavor to me, being anti-hunter or being just opposed to hunter, just under understanding. So what this is quite often taken like, oh, you're taking the pleasure from killing, or you just like to kill stuff. And you touching on a very important thing that actually most of the hunters, or at least that's my position, most of the hunters, they treat that element as a necessary to the whole process, but it's far from being the most important or far from being pleasurable. Is that your experience and your view as well?
Yeah, this is of course somehow at the core of the critique of hunting, that there is kind of a pleasure to kill. And of course, the question is what this pleasure actually refers to. Yeah, and I've already kind of indicated that the emotional experiences involved, not only in killing, but also in hunting generally, they are really quite complex. There are a lot of emotions going on. And the question is, when hunters themselves, for example, say they find hunting, they find pleasure in hunting, that the question is that the same as finding pleasure in killing? And then I would say that that's not the case. Yeah, usually, hunting is so much more than killing, although everything is kind of geared towards killing, but there's a lot more going on. Yeah, most hunters, when you see kind of how much time the actual killing has in the whole hunting process, it's really tiny moments, basically. Yeah, it's a few minutes, and there's so much more going on in hunting. So when you are in, let's say, in a forest, in a field, somewhere, you're getting to know the place, you're getting to know the habitats of the different animals going on. You go tracking, looking for signs, and so on. Yeah, so there's a lot of things actually, or you can just spend hours waiting somewhere, observing wildlife and kind of immersing yourself in the landscape. So there's so many pleasurable things that go on, and that hunters usually mention what makes hunting pleasurable. But I have to say, it's difficult because in my experience, at least with my research on hunting in Germany, is that hunters usually don't like to talk about killing. Yeah, it's something that they really, even amongst themselves, they don't really talk about it. They might talk about kind of the conditions of how it happened and so on, but they don't stay much with that moment of killing. Yeah, so I've never really spoken with a hunter, and I've been doing research on this since about 2016. I've never really spoken with a hunter who would really kind of speak enthusiastically about that moment of killing, and that it was so cool to see the animal die or something like that. I've never heard anything like that. Yeah, the things that one might describe with kind of positive feelings with that in the actual killing, these are kind of emotions, as I said, like relief. Yeah, so when you manage really to give that kind of clean death that you ideally want to have. Yeah, so this is kind of when you kind of feel happy when that has happened really, and nothing has gone wrong. Yeah, but knowing at the same time that this was a precarious moment, and if anything had happened and this didn't take place, then you wouldn't feel happy. Then you would be really disturbed. Yeah, so I saw many hunters who were really getting quite shaky and so on, and were really disturbed because they only injured an animal and it got away, and now they need to find it. Yeah, and suddenly this urge started that they feel, well, they need to find it. They need to finish the killing. Otherwise, the animal is suffering now, and they're kind of compassionate in that moment and then kind of suffering with the animal and are ashamed somehow that they didn't kill it cleanly. Yeah. So I think when we talk about, and this is also kind of perhaps then the regret that comes in, at least one part of it. So I would say kind of this pleasure in killing, that is something one has to look really into detail of what's actually meant when a hunter says that, and what he refers to actually.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I just gonna add here that this emotional element, I remember one of the first hunts where it was not like I was on the hunt. I was just taken for a hunt that my colleague were going hunting. And after he shot a deer, he turns to me and he shows me how his hand is shaking.
Yes.
From the emotions. It was like a nice clean kill, like he dropped the animal. And my thought was like, what an intimate moment. Like, I wouldn't expect, I would more expect him to try to conceal that and, like play tough guy or something. It was nothing like that. He turned to me and he showed me like his emotions, like he was shaking, literally shaking. And he was experienced hunter. He was doing like for 20 years. So that speaks to this emotional element, and that hunters do take, very seriously what's going on. We're going to come back to that. So let's park that thought for a second. I just want to pick out on some other aspect that you mentioned in the introduction. And that aspect is the aspect of participation in nature. And there's a quote, I don't remember what book or who said it, but it goes like, I probably gonna I paraphrase it, but it is the response why you cannot do the same thing with the camera. Why you cannot, instead of a rifle, you take the camera and you just also tracking and stalking and lying in the ditch waiting for the animal to show up and so on. And the answer to that was like, because with camera, you're only an observer. While you're hunting, you're participating. And obviously that is also a statement that I and a lot of hunters understand intuitively because we know the difference. But can you elaborate for the listeners and viewers, and from your perspective on that difference between participating and merely observing?
I don't. Yeah, I think I would phrase it a little bit more carefully in that respect. I know that, for example, in Germany, hunters and wildlife nature photographers, they're really like that. They don't really like each other. Yeah. And I would say, I mean, it's always the thing, and but one could turn the same argument against hunters, basically. So why would the photographer only observe? Because he's out there with his camera and he's kind of observing wildlife through his camera, and this is kind of detaches him from the actual encounter with the animal. It's just kind of looking at the screen and looks at the screen rather than at the real animal. But of course, we know, especially with modern hunting technologies, with modern scopes and so on, there's a lot of technological mediation too, which we probably come to later, what kind of effects that has on participation. So I wouldn't say that kind of, let's say, wildlife photographers or mushroomers, or even, I also do wildlife photography, I also do tracking. And I wouldn't say that this is a difference between the one participates and the other just observes, because when you do wildlife photography, for example, you have to participate as well in order to shoot good pictures. Yeah. So I would say they are quite similarly involved and immersed into the environment, similarly to what hunters do. So that's not the real difference. What we argue is that kind of the real difference is what they participate in exactly. When you look at kind of the whole hunting process and you see kind of what comes before the kill, for example. Yeah, so getting to know a place, finding signs of animals, waiting somewhere, perhaps being patient, then observing the animals, waiting for the right moment. These are all things that photographers do too. The point is at some point when they shoot, the experience and the participation begins to differ. Because when the photographer shoots, nothing happens to the animal. Yeah, the animal stays a healthy, living animal and continues its way. And the photographer goes back to his car and goes his way. And this is kind of where the participation stops. Yeah. Whereas for hunters, this is kind of where they become really deeply integrated into a food web, basically. Yeah. So their shooting makes a difference to the animals and to the ecosystem. Yeah. They become part of it. They become part of these ecological processes. You could say that kind of the mere presence of a human being, also like a photographer, if they are noticed, has a kind of an effect on maybe induce fear or so on animals, and also has an effect on them. But hunting has a material effect on the ecology of a place, and this is what makes it different. And also in terms of experience, it's a different kind of nature experience because you're doing something within that ecosystem. You become part of it, you change it, and also you are experiencing the dead animal, and you're dealing with the dead animal. Yeah. So not only has the photographer not that kind of killing experience, but also not the experience with a dead animal. And a hunter also, in terms of their knowledge, also learn a lot from the dead animal. Yeah, just by field dressing, by opening up the animal, by having a closer look, kind of on the condition of the animal, seeing its individual features, seeing perhaps whether it has any parasites, whether it has any disease. Just opening up, looking at the organs and so on. They can learn a lot about not only the animal, but also about the habitat where the animal lives. Yeah, about kind of the feed available and so on, and whether it has a healthy population in the area and so on. So there's a lot to be learned actually from what comes after the kill. Yeah, and this, of course, is all missing in any other kind of nature experience.
And obviously then once you turn that animal into food that you can eat and you can share with your family or your friends, that is kind of like an extension of that experience, which is, I feel, much stronger than showing someone a photo that you made. It's more touching you, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it becomes basically embodied. Yeah, you basically also kind of embody the animal because you eat it, and you also know. I mean, I had times when I did my field work when I was at a hunt, and you kind of even if you haven't killed an animal, you just participated and someone else did, and you helped with the field dressing and so on. And then I went back home and I had a kind of a freezer bag full of a heart or a liver, kidneys, and so on. Kind of hands still kind of bloody in the grooves of your skin or under your fingernails, and you're kind of cutting up the heart and so on, and preparing it and eating it or so. You're kind of still partly there back, and when you eat it, you still see the living animal. Yeah, so you have that kind of connection just onto your plate and into the eating process also. And even when you prepare food for later to store it and so on, you have these reminders in your freezer basically, and you put them out, and it's always kind of the death stays with you basically. Yeah, so you can't basically forget what happened basically in there. What happens, of course, is then also kind of when you always kind of go back to the same place in hunting, which most often is the case in Germany for hunters, is of course kind of where you hunt, your hunting grounds, they become full of these memories of different kills, of different animals, living animals, dead animals, and so on. So this is all kind of creating kind of a landscape that kind of invites you basically to deal with your emotions and what happens. Yeah. If you have the privilege that you can go back to the same place again and again. Yeah. And this is again about kind of what's the right conditions for these positive processes to take place, and what are the hunting conditions where hunters are not allowed to go along that process.
And that is an excellent point. And we're going to dig into that as well. I just want to add one other thing to that aspect of preparation of food, is that I think that this also makes you more connected with your food and understanding where it comes from. Because like you said, you have that experience, you remember that. When you go to the supermarket and you're basically buying these red objects in plastic tray, people not thinking much about that animal, what life that animal had, and like what happened to it, and like how it ended up. It's not even recognized often as an animal, while you, like, whether you're taking the whole quarter or you're taking already roast and steaks, but you know how they became what it is. And I probably a year ago, I was talking with the author who wrote a book about the similar connection between hunting and conservation. And he was, in his book, he was talking about a restaurant in the US where they're serving food, but when you order a chicken, you are like actually getting a chicken with feet and with head, like the whole chicken. And he was describing in the book reaction of people who are just outraged because they didn't, it is like shocking. I was like, well, that's actually how it looks like. It's just you separated yourself from these things. And, again, the paper talks about field dressing and the whole experience of field dressing. And the quote I often remember is like, when you put your hands into like a still warm body cavity of an animal, you're dealing with a serious stuff. That's a serious stuff. And these are those stakes that photographers, they don't deal with that. I give you another, and for our listeners, another kind of thing that, for me, the difference between fishing and hunting is kind of in the same realm, right? That when you go fishing and you're successful and you catch fish, you always have an option to release those fish. Well, if you're careful and we're going to talk about catch and release as well, because there is a section about catch and release in the paper, that you release those fish and then you come back, you put your rod back in the shed and you're done. When you're on a hunt and you're successful and you're coming back with the net, like, that is your responsibility now. That's far from over. Now it's the work. And so the stakes and everything else is much higher in that case.
I mean, that's definitely the case. Just in terms of field dressing also, and that kind of experiences that are afforded by it. I once actually had an accident during field work while field dressing. I cut myself basically while trying to break through the collarbone of a roe deer. So I don't know exactly what happened, but basically I ended up kind of stabbing myself into my thigh, and so it wasn't really dangerous or so, but basically I had this little wound, and I could kind of see my own blood. I could see a little bit of fatty tissue and so on. And I suddenly had this moment where I thought, actually, that's exactly like kind of the animal that I was just cutting open. It looked exactly the same. Yeah. So that was this moment also where you think also when you cut through the ribs and so on, it's all kind of, it's a familiar feeling somehow because you know a body. Yeah. There is some similarity between kind of the animal body and your own body that becomes very apparent in that practice of field dressing and butchering, and this is unique. That's a unique kind of experience to hunting. This is what you can't get from anything else. Yeah, and of course, kind of, it also creates some kind of bond because of that similarity. Yeah, I mean, there's also, you probably have heard that in some indigenous cultures in the circumpolar north, they have these bear rituals. So when they go bear hunting, the bear is always treated in a particular, really respectful way, because they say, well, he's like a human. And of course, you can really experience that it is like a human when you kind of cut away the skin, and you see that, although really quite big, it really kind of seems to look human, and that does something to people. Yeah, when they suddenly see the similarities, and there's a living being like yourself.
Bear looks very much like human being. Once you peel the hide away, it's disturbingly similar.
Yeah. So I think that's something quite unique in that kind of experiences, and what it could trigger then in terms of emotions and kind of developing something from these emotions.
For sure. Listen, we take a little bit detour now, but then we're going to take back around to the things that we are talking all around. One thing that I noticed in the paper that I like was kind of challenging the idea that the best way to care of the environment is like if you remove humans. That was particularly interesting because it's something we spoke on the podcast again a few times, and I think about it a lot, that humans are part of it. Boils down to the question: are humans natural? And humans are part of the ecosystem for thousands and thousands of years. And then you talk about like, well, even Neanderthals, they were deforesting the land, and they were making opening and clearing things and so on and so forth. And before them, there were, pachyderms, mastodons and mammals and so on. They're doing essentially the same thing, impacting the landscape. So we talk often about the keystone species, cornerstone species, or ecosystems engineers. Like, humans are ecosystem engineers as well. Obviously, there is another aspect of like, yeah, we can quite capably wreck the whole environment, which is kind of like probably material for another podcast, right? But let's stick with the natural environment, and I would like to hear from you your views, your take on whether if you want to protect an area, if you want to protect the environment, the landscape, would it be better to just, remove humans altogether, or what role human play in protection of the landscape?
This idea of kind of separating geographical areas and kind of preventing human intervention is, of course, kind of an idea that's deeply connected to kind of this Western idea that we can kind of separate humans from the rest of the world, that we can separate kind of nature from culture, so that we really have these areas of wilderness that are kind of untouched by humans. And we all know by now that this was an ideal. It never matched reality. And of course, now that we know that kind of in this age of the Anthropocene, that we really even touched kind of the deepest places on Earth, in the sea. So there's nothing untouched left on Earth. So to try to kind of artificially separate out areas that we try to untouch, that won't work, right? Because, we are everywhere. The negative effect of this kind of thinking is that we really think of ourselves as something exceptional and as kind of a species who doesn't belong really. Yeah. But if we don't belong to this planet, where else should we go? Yeah. The ecological view basically is that we are part of it. Yeah. So we are part of this web of relations, of these processes going on, and there is no outside. Yeah, even wildlife manager or ecosystem managers, they are not managing from a superior position outside and manage something that is somewhere else. They are not God, but they are part of it. Yeah, but sometimes, at least theoretically, we still kind of take that as a basic assumption. Yeah, we pretend as if we were not part of it. And we think because it's just not, it doesn't match up with reality, that can't be a good choice. And we also see it hasn't worked that well so far. So we argue that kind of what is called this dwelling perspective, which is kind of it's a difficult word. It comes from kind of the German philosopher Martin Heidegger, and it was brought into this whole scientific discourse by my doctoral supervisor, actually Tim Ingold, who worked with Sami reindeer herders in northern Finland, and who looks a lot about kind of indigenous hunters and gatherers in the circumpolar north. That most people in the world, and especially indigenous people, they always see themselves as part of the land where they live. And we often look at indigenous communities as kind of exemplary in the way they deal or manage with the environment. Of course, there's also a certain romanticism going on sometimes that is a little bit too much. But basically, in the way they deal and try to engage with the environment is one that comes from out of the middle of things. Yeah. And the knowledge that they gain, the way that they learn about the environment, how they learn about the animals is not kind of from theory. It's not from books, but it's actually from engagement. Yeah. And therefore, in this perspective, we think that kind of traditionally people learn by becoming engaged in something, in participating, in trying things out. Yeah, and learning by themselves, in gaining experiential knowledge. Yeah, and we in the West, of course, we've developed a way of considering knowledge as something that is really abstract and kind of located in the head, kind of an assembly of facts, basically, that you then apply later on somewhere else. Yeah, so it really it separates knowledge production from the place of application and actually where it comes from. Yeah, so we have separated out knowledge from where it came from and made it into something else that you can actually study in books or at university and so on. And we just wanted to remind that, there are many things that one can learn that way, but even then, even scientists, even natural scientists, they do field work. Yeah, so they also learn by practical engagement with the land, with an ecosystem, with animals, and so on. It's just kind of a matter of translating then their experience from the field into something more theoretical. But then they have trouble integrating it back to where it actually came from. And what we're saying is that it would be good if we were also aware that there's a different kind of knowledge that comes from experience and practical engagement, and why not kind of bring them together, basically? Because I think knowledge that comes, let's say, from this embedded position is a different kind of knowledge, and it's useful, it's valuable knowledge. Yeah, but we have this tendency of not really of kind of thinking that experiential knowledge is too subjective. Yeah, it's just kind of one person's point of view, kind of, and we want to have objective knowledge, and it doesn't get together. Yeah, in my field, in anthropology, there's an age-long discussion about kind of this ongoing fight between scientific knowledge on the one hand and so-called traditional ecological knowledge of indigenous communities. Yeah, and especially in the US and Canada, there are legal fights for decades about what the role is of traditional ecological knowledge, which is knowledge that usually stems from a direct engagement kind of with the land, with the animals, and so on. Is it on the same level? Is it even knowledge, or is it just belief? Yeah, is it superstition maybe? Yeah, so it's quite a difficult topic. But we wanted to pay attention that it's not only indigenous people who have experiential knowledge. We also have it here in the West. We also gain knowledge by experiencing things, and so do kind of Western so-called recreational hunters. Yeah, so why not asking similar questions like we do with indigenous hunters, for example?
That's a very good point, and that gives us an excellent segue to talking about this place based experiences, to the connection to the place. And I'm going to start with something I know from social media and like a well experienced hunter and a guy who is like well connected to the land. And he said that he would be quite happy if the, like a paid services of hunting and like hunting, tourist hunting, like disappeared overnight. And I was quite surprised because I perceive him as, being pro hunting. And yet his opinion is like, if you happen to not have access to land and be connected to that land, then I'm happy if you don't have an opportunity for hunting. Now, first of all, shout out to Richard. If you're listening to that, you know it's you. And secondly, yeah, it's very interesting. It's very cold, of course, because it excludes a number of people who could benefit and have those experiences. But there is a element of truth to that. Like from my own perspective, I would, I was asked once, like, would you ever go to Africa to shoot an elephant? And I was thinking about it, and everything aside, like money and whatever, I would. My answer was probably no, and the answer was no because like, oh, you go there and you just you don't know where you are, and then someone shows you like there's an elephant. Where? There. That tree. No, it's not a tree. It's an elephant. Oh, that's how it looks. Boom. Right, and then you're done. So I probably wouldn't like that. If I had an experience, if I had an opportunity to become somehow proficient in elephant hunting, that's a different proposition. And that was a little bit like with shark fishing. I came from Poland to Ireland, and when I saw that there's an opportunity for shark fishing, I went mad. And I never understood my colleagues who were going on a charter boat for shark fishing. They caught one shark, and they were like, all right, done, box ticked, and they never done it again. Because for me, the main attraction was to actually learn about shark fishing, to actually learn how to find sharks, to actually learn how to do the chum, the rubby-dubby, and how to rig the bait, and like know how to do this, like have a less superficial connection to it. Is that your understanding as well? Is that your experience as well after all the research, and what's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the hunting tourism is a difficult topic because also, it's usually in the spotlight for being, let's say, not proper hunting, and this kind of brings us also kind of to this difficult thing about what is proper hunting. And of course, all hunters have a kind of an opinion on that. Non-hunters also have an opinion, and anti-hunters, for them, there is nothing like proper hunting. But it's something that brings us to the question of what is ethical hunting, basically. Yeah. So this is what the question of hunting tourism is about. And of course, there's so many different kinds of hunting tourism also. When you kind of think back classically to this African style safaris, which used to be quite different. When you look kind of the old safaris kind of in colonial times, and of course one of the big problems is we were talking about what are the conditions in which hunting takes place. And of course we know that the origins of that type of hunting tourism is in colonialism, in kind of a web of kind of power relationships, really. It's not kind of only power between human groups, but also between kind of power between human hunter and animal and so on. So it's that kind of historical origin is deeply problematic. But at least kind of compared with kind of safaris going on today, what we see is safaris back then, they took weeks or months. Yeah, so safari tourist hunters, they would have had the opportunity actually to get to know places and animals and so on. Yeah, if it's a literary account, but if you read Hemingway, Green Hills of Africa or so, you see that there is some kind of engagement with the local specificities. But of course now safaris look very different. It's a matter of days. Yeah, sometimes just spending 1 or 2 days and just doing that. It's still kind of having a list of animals you want to kill. And I also would say that's quite problematic in itself, because, I mean, what's kind of the motivation then behind that list? But it's really different. And this is also one of the key transformations that we've seen in recent years is this acceleration of hunting in terms of the time spent in hunting. And of course, the big problem is, on the one hand, with hunting tourism is a troubled relationship with a place, and also a troubled relationship with the time spent with hunting. Yeah. So usually you're in a new place that you don't know, animals you don't know, but you don't have much time in order to get to know. Yeah. And they usually come together, these two problems. Yeah. And we say, of course, there are certain things in terms of hunters' knowledge and experience and so on that are transposable. Yeah. I mean, when you know how to shoot with a gun, you can do it in Germany, in Ireland, or in Africa. It will work, basically, generally. Of course, there are other things, because it might be that you have to shoot at a longer distance, for example, which is also...
Or recoil will be different.
Yeah, with a different type of caliber, yeah. So there are certain things you have to adjust to, but that's all kind of manageable. But you need someone else or several people actually to assist you. Yeah, which is quite interesting, because you see kind of hunting is usually seen as a kind of a one man or one woman activity, kind of the lonely hunter kind of out there, kind of against nature. That's also kind of this North American trope, yeah, kind of conquering and competing against nature and so on, and mastering it. But most often it's also kind of a social activity. Yeah, it's a distributed effort where several people work also together. They might share responsibilities. They might share different tasks. And of course, that's the case in hunting tourism as well. So you need to share, basically. But the difference is to kind of non-tourist hunting situations is that, of course, you're either in a very hierarchical power structure, just like when you go hunting in Africa, and you have your local guides who do the tracking or so, and are not really paid that well, and you're kind of the big guy going there, paying all the cash, being able to pay thousands of dollars for this whole trip. And then on the other hand, I mean, it's an economic setting, right? So this is all about, it's basically about money. You're paying for it. You're paying for a certain experience, and you're paying an outfitter that's trying to create exactly this kind of experience. Yeah. And of course, because time is valuable and costs money, they try to do all that on a tight budget and within tight time constraints. Yeah. And these taken together are not really favorable for the hunter really to go kind of to use everything that we've just talked about, because it's more about the experience of moments. Yeah. So you're basically looking for frozen moments in time, and kind of condensing the hunting really to the kill, and you're not kind of, it's not the start of anything. Yeah, because kind of you're going kind of away. You're not staying with the trouble, so to speak, in the place where you are. You leave it again. So it's definitely something different than kind of normal hunting in non-touristic situations. But we perhaps would have to look kind of in more detail then at kind of specific tourist experiences and what exactly they do. Yeah, and kind of what people take from it, basically, the hunters themselves. I mean, apart from kind of the trophy photo shot or the whole animal that they take preserved back with them, or just kind of tiny trophies or so. So what exactly are they taking from it? That would be the question. What does it do? What does the emotional experience lead to in these cases? Does it help in the development of certain environmental virtues, or is it kind of going against the whole grain? How do hunters basically integrate their tourist experiences with their normal hunting experiences? Because there is a connection, right? I mean, most hunting tourists, it's not like they don't have any hunting opportunities at all. If you have the money to pay for a safari trip, you also have the money to go hunting back home. So how do they integrate the tourist hunting experience with the normal experience? And there is actually, when you think about in continental Europe, when you think to historic times where hunting was an aristocratic privilege, hunting tourism, or let's say a precursor of hunting tourism, was part of hunting life. Yeah, so you were invited by other aristocrats from somewhere else that were related to you or you were neighbors with, and you went to them and went hunting on their land with their hunting group and so on. And this was just part of it. Yeah, so it was more about, in that case, it was more about establishing relationships within the hunting community. So that's a different kind. And then even today, in Germany, for example, even kind of normal hunters, they get invited to hunts all the time. They don't just hunt in their own hunting district. Yeah, they might also visit other places and so on. And of course, it's also an opportunity for them to learn something new. Yeah, to hunt in a new kind of landscape, to hunt new kinds of animals that you don't have at home. And of course, there is a connection. But the question is, what kind of connection and how the hunters really integrate that? And of course, I think if you are invited by neighbors or so and you go hunting on their grounds, it's a different kind of out-of-place hunting experience than doing it in a tourist trip to Africa in a very economic setting that is all about money.
And I think it's also different in case, like if you hunt in County Kerry and then you get invited to hunt in County Donegal, you effectively in the same ecosystem, in the same place. It's a different geographical location. You maybe don't know like a very specific things about this particular landscape, but overall the assemblage of species is the same. The weather patterns are the same. The vegetation is the same. So I guess you could more relate to that. While if you're going from County Kerry or Donegal in Ireland to Africa, to Tanzania, you just, like you said, you would need like a first month to even get your head around the landscape itself and the animals and the sounds that surround you and the smells and everything else. You're just completely out of your element. So I guess that's also important, to an extent, how far geographically you go in terms of ecosystem.
Yeah.
Look, so I think we are here where we already started talking about what are conditions that, if not met, will not support and will not develop this environmental stewardship. I presume that's the one. But the article, the paper, lists a few more, like, for example, night vision technology or just in general technology, right? Trail cameras, I presume, is one of them. Use of drones, that in many jurisdictions, use of drones is prohibited. Right? We talked to I don't know where I got this from. There was a guy who had a trail cam installed, and that trail cam was sending a notification to his phone. And when he got notification on his phone, he was taking a rifle and going to shoot a deer and whatever, right? So I guess these are the more we're gonna pile up these conditions, the more we starting to really lose that connection with the environment that will then prevent developing of that stewardship. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly kind of like you say, it's a lot of different things that all have kind of a small impact. Yeah, so it's not about hunting is either favoring a development towards environmental stewardship or it does not. It's really looking at the whole set of conditions, just like different parts of a puzzle, and saying that there's so many different things that actually have an impact on all that. So every time that a new technology is introduced, every time hunting laws are changed, every time you go hunting in a different setting, or every time kind of a new animal perhaps might be introduced. Yeah? These are all kind of opportunities to look at what the impact actually is on the hunting experience and what it does to the hunter actually. So this is kind of what we want to draw attention to, because there is no kind of regularity. There's no natural law that says, well, if this condition happens, then this happens to the hunter or something like that. There is no clear causality between these things. It's more kind of just like with any kind of learning. Yeah, I mean, when you are in school and you have kind of what's the role of the teacher, what's the role of the classroom, what's the role of your classmates, what's the role of your learning materials. Yeah, I mean, they all contribute in some way, but none of it is kind of causal for your learning experience, right? And this is the same with kind of the challenges that we kind of list. So we need to look at kind of the bigger whole basically and what it is made up of. Yeah, and so we, for example, with with kind of new technologies, it's not about a matter of, let's say, kind of what do they contribute to efficient hunting, to your hunting success. But we also know it's an ethical question. Yeah, and it's not just an ethical question. And that is, I think, what is quite new about our article is it's not just an ethical question in terms of how does it help for a clean and painful death of the animal. So it's not just kind of looking at the animal, but it's actually looking back at the hunter, yeah, and then saying, what does it do to the hunter? Yeah, but what kind of hunter will you be when you use that kind of technology? So acknowledging that there is a mutual relationship that you can't get out of a hunter. So the death of the animal has something to do with yourself and what kind of person you are. I find it quite interesting. You know, there's you probably know this Jägermeister Schnaps, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know whether you once had a look at what that is actually written something around the label of that bottle, and it's a line from an old German hunting poem from the 19th century, from old Prussian forester and hunter, and it says something like, "It's the hunter's shield of honor to care and look after his game and to kind of recognize the creator in the creature." So it says something about kind of the way you hunt makes you either a good or a bad person, basically. Yeah. So and you have that in all kinds of hunting traditions all over the world. Yeah. So the way you hunt always says something about you as a person, right? And so that's a discussion that I don't know from our public debates on hunting and kind of how hunting develops and so on. We never ask kind of what it does to the hunter. We just ask whether it's ethical or not, or if it's just in terms of the animal or hunted or not. But we usually leave the hunter out. Yeah, just like there's something different. Yeah. And I think it's quite interesting to link them back up again and say, well, we can't really discuss new hunting technologies without kind of asking what it does to the hunter, because often they themselves, they see that connection. I mean, we're in one of my research team on wild boar hunting, where I'm part of, is for example, we look at hunting in cases of an outbreak of African swine fever. So when hunting kind of turns culling of animals. And we often see, and in different countries basically, that hunters hate these situations. They don't want to kill that way. They don't want to be too efficient in hunting. They are often ashamed about it. I once interviewed a hunter in Eastern Germany where we had kind of the biggest outbreak of African swine fever a few years ago, which is still running. And as part of kind of the eradication program, they set up wild boar traps there. And usually this is something that we don't have in German hunting. We had it in some instances, but usually German hunters don't like trapping big game animals. It's something that you usually reserve for small predators like foxes and badgers and martens and so on. But usually they think it's quite unethical. And also they don't like this kind of killing trapped boar in a cage. And I spoke with, I had really trouble finding hunters who do that. They didn't want to talk with me. But I found one hunter that I knew through a different channel. And he was also kind of a forester, a forestry worker, basically. And he was part of a team who had to look after one of these traps. And but his older colleague, he did it. He did actually the actual killing. And he never wanted to have the other hunter with him when he did that. Yeah, even both were hunters. He was too uneasy killing that way, and then he was really ashamed. Yeah, the other hunter only was allowed to come in later when everything was done and ready, and he was kind of ready to deal with it again. So they know it does something to them, and they don't like it. Yeah. So there is this question of kind of that we actually, why do we never discuss kind of what happens there? Of course, we should discuss it in terms of what happens to the animal, yeah, because that's kind of the main thing. But as I said, hunters are implicated in that death, and it also affects them. Yeah, so this is something we should take into account.
This is this discussion that on one hand, like you said, the hunters usually, let's use this term, proper hunters. I'm making air quotes for people who are only listening to that. They don't want this, like I said, to be too easy, right? I even heard I want to make that hunt as difficult as possible. I'm going to pass, if I'm going on the hunt that takes, 3 days, I'm not going to shoot on the first day because maybe, but then there comes another angle of it, like, well, if you want to make that hunt as difficult as possible, like what about the welfare of animal? You should want to do it to be as easy and as sure as possible. And I spoke many times on the podcast about archery hunting, which in Ireland and the UK is illegal. I think in most of Europe is illegal. There's just some regions.
Germany too.
Yeah, but I think some regions in Hungary, some regions in France and Spain this is allowed, and obviously this is allowed in the US. And this is a big discussion about it. Like, it's it's unhumane. And these are the grounds it is banned in most of Europe because it's inhumane. The margin of error is this and that. But then there is another aspect of but the connection is quite different. You need to be so much closer to an animal. It's so much more difficult. You're so much more in the nature because the sound you're making is as much as you step on a stick and break, while you not have this big discharge of so this is an interesting conversation. And I guess as usual, like in life, you need to find a balance between being that hunt, being the whole idea of fair chase is basically what is fair chase, and is increasing the likelihood that you actually wound the animal. Is that your idea of fair chase, or is it I'm gonna make it, like you said, I'm gonna identify the animal with a drone, and then I'm gonna just use all means possible to kill it as quickly as possible? So that's probably topic for entire different podcast, I guess.
No, I mean, but I think the interesting question here is really kind of what the motivation is. Yeah, so we know kind of recreational hunting is about and kind of in Western countries is often it includes a restraint. So you're not using everything that you could use. And the question is why you don't do that. Put in a positive way, you could say, well, it's about the animal. Yeah, it's about kind of fairness to the animal. You don't want to turn it into a slaughter, and it has to do with respect. The negative thing would be, and that's unfortunately also part of the kind of many hunting communities, it could also have to do with personal motivations. It could be the view that you, as a hunter, you're a kind of apex predator, and you want to prove yourself and to show your mastery over the natural world. And this is why you want to make it kind of a challenge for you. Yeah. So it could go either way. And so, of course, the question is for the hunting community is kind of how do they mentor the new generation, in which direction should it go? And this is why I think talking about stewardship actually is such an important step, actually, or it could be, because I mean, what it is for me, and I always have this picture in mind, from Lord of the Rings, from the Steward of Gondor. And when perhaps you probably know the book or the film. So when you walk into the throne room, there is at the end of the throne room, there are the steps leading up to the actual throne of Gondor, really kind of magnificent. And then kind of just down on one of the first few steps, there's a simple chair. And this is kind of the place for the steward. Yeah. So the steward could actually, I mean, the throne is free. Yeah. He could just walk up and sit on the throne and kind of make decisions from up there. But no, he's sitting on a simple chair on one of the first steps. And this is for me, actually, kind of two different ways of looking at hunting in Western countries. Yeah, we know we could hunt from the position of kind of the ruler and kind of imposing our own motivations and wishes onto the animals, and just think about ourselves, about what we want from it. And we want to kind of have an experience of mastery. We want some trophies and so on, and really put ourselves in the center. Or we would say, of course, yeah, I could use all this power, but I'm not, because I know I'm part of something bigger. Yeah. And this is why I don't use all that power, and I don't take myself too seriously. And I also take back some of my motivations in order for kind of the health of my kind of the game population, for the good of the animal, for the good of the ecosystem, and so on. And this is what I understand as kind of a virtuous hunter in that way. That kind of hunter as an environmental steward, he has developed certain virtues to take himself back a little bit and decenter hunting from all it's all about me, but I'm part of something bigger. Yeah, and this is a kind of development that I would like to see. Basically, I'm sure. I mean, there are hunters who think that way, but I think there's also kind of other developments going on which are still kind of in this old tradition of I'm kind of at the top of the food pyramid, and I'm the one actually who decides on things depending to kind of on my interests.
Yeah, dominionistic point of view. Listen, Thorsten, I gotta ask you about the catch and release. You say like catch and release is usually in angling is used as a staple of environmentally conscious angler who is taking pleasure and is in the environment, but at the same time takes care of the environment and releases the fish, and that way ensures, of course, there's a mortality rate on the released fish, but at least fish is released and has a bigger chances of survival than if it ended up on the plate or a frying pan. So usually catch and release anglers like to label themselves as those stewards of the environment and conservationists and so on. You argue that catch and release might sometimes limit that development of environmental virtue. Could you please lay it out to us? Like, how come?
Well, I mean, I first have to say that I'm not an expert on angling and fishing, and especially also not on catch and release. So perhaps just to say something about our team of authors who wrote that article. And I also have to say that I can't pretend kind of to talk for the whole team. because we're five very different people who came together to write this article. And how it came about basically was that Sam Shepard, kind of the lead author of this article, and Robert Arlinghaus, they had written another paper before that on angling and fishing and environmental stewardship. And they're both experts on angling and fishing. And they wanted to extend their argument and write more about the value of the actual killing experience, and wanted to bring in some expert on hunting. So brought in my colleague Erika von Essen, who was also on a podcast with you some time ago.
Shout out to Erika.
Because it was all about kind of the killing experience and emotions or so, she brought in me as kind of the last person in the team. There was also Charles List, our philosopher, in there, who was responsible for the philosophical input. So I came to the paper as the last person there. And of course, I was never much kind of an expert at this. Catch and release fishing was also new for me, basically. I mean, I knew it existed, but I'd never done any research on it and haven't read a lot about it. But it was one of the discussions. It was one of the points, just like with trophy hunting. So, and it was really quite difficult to say anything definitive about what we might think about catch and release. And I think there might also be some differences in opinion there amongst the different authors. I think Robert, for example, had a more positive view on it, where I think Erika and I had a more negative view on it. So, but as I said again, it's not an either or. So it's really looking at. Usually, it's a mix of different things that go on. The only thing that kind of we could agree on then is, if we put kind of the effect of the killing experience in the center and becoming part of a food web, and also how important it is to then kind of what comes after the kill, then it's clear that catch and release cannot offer the whole experience of that, right? And I think this is kind of all that I can say, basically, because I'm really not an expert on that. But just in terms of this central argument of our paper, I think this is kind of the thing that we have to consider. That's something that catch and release cannot do. Of course, in terms of caring for fish and caring for their habitat and becoming engaged and active in kind of preserving habitats and so on, or improving habitats, that's something that can still happen. Yeah. And I think there are also studies that show that indeed catch and release anglers do a lot of these other things. So they might be really good conservationists. But just in terms of our argument about killing experience and how it can foster certain virtues and so on, this is something that one would have to consider more problematic in catch and release.
One other thing that I just cannot leave is the importance of hunting rituals, and they were discussed in this context of embedded stewardship. I'll give you my view on the hunting rituals. Maybe it is politically incorrect, but for example, like on one hand, after hunt, where hunters just like laying down all the animals in the I don't remember what's the term used for that. Could be for bystanders. That is straight up off-putting. Oh, look at them, right? I remember commenting on one of the social media posts. It's like, hey, this is not meant to show that they like killing. It is meant to show the abundance of resource. Not that, oh, look how many we killed. But then there are things like the last meal, I think it is called, when the animal is dead and you take a branch and you put it in the animal's mouth, and it's like, oh, this is to show respect. And you sometimes you see on the hunting forums the pictures and the comments, oh, you're always showing the respect and so on. And like, to me, it's like, well, how are you showing respect? You're stuffing the branches into a dead animal's mouth. That's silly. That's not the respect. But that's just my view. So please explain to me and to listeners, like, what is the role of those hunting rituals? Are they on, on which side of the argument they are, and how important they are for this developing environmental stewardship?
Since I'm an anthropologist, I perhaps have to start with kind of what we know most about, which is kind of also kind of indigenous hunting. Because the hunting rituals, we know it also from archaeology, hunting has always been surrounded with rituals. Yeah. And there's a recent book also, really quite good, by Jan Dysert, the North American sociologist, who wrote a nice introduction or kind of a handbook on hunting. And he also argues that all these rituals are basically there in order to deal with the problem of death and killing that happens in hunting. And interestingly, it's again linking back to this point of hunters being implicated in killing. Because the thing is, when you kind of look back in time and when people lived as hunters and gatherers in small bands, hunters go out and kill, and then they come back into the community. And of course, the question for the community is, okay, so there's this person who has just killed, and he's coming back now into the community. Yeah, so it's a person who knows how to kill, and he's bringing that with him into the community. So there are often kind of exactly rituals happening at this time and place when hunters return. Yeah, it's an important step of the whole hunting practice, basically, the return to the own community. So a lot of things need to be done, not just when he's out there, but especially when he's coming back, and when the dead animal is also back in the community. So a lot of these hunting rituals are also about kind of the treatment of the animal after the kill, and also the treatment of the meat and of the whole animal in itself. And why? Because an animal is not just kind of a body, but it's also in indigenous hunting communities, it's a living being with a soul, and the soul is still there, although the living being might not. So it's something that you have to deal with in some way. Yeah. So this is kind of the origins where these hunting rituals actually come from. It's to deal with both the soul of the animal and also the way you deal with and interact with that soul has an impact on the living human people who deal with it. And this is why you need to be careful in all times. So when we come to Western recreational hunting, then of course we are kind of in a different setting. Let's say we have the kind of the traditions that you mentioned. They are especially kind of Central European traditions, a lot of them coming from Germanic countries or kind of Prussian countries going towards Eastern Europe, Austrian, Hungarian Empire, and so on. They're quite big. And of course, we have to see that the question is whether these rituals have the same origin. Because as far as we know, most of these rituals have their origins in aristocratic practices. So this so-called Streckelegen, as we call it in the German hunters' language, the kind of the laying out of animals after a big societal hunt, there is an element of showing off. Yeah, so it was basically different lords kind of demonstrating to their hunting guests how many animals they have, how rich they are in game, basically, on their land. So this is certainly still the case, that it's a kind of a performance, yeah? And there's also an element of competition there somewhere, in terms of that usually hunters would be honored for killing so and so many animals, that they would get one of these little twigs as a token of respect, depending on how many animals they killed. So it's also within the hunting community. It's also meant as a kind of a show of appreciation. There's a little bit of competition, maybe also a little bit of shaming for those who haven't killed anything. So this is all in these rituals. But I would claim that what's also in there, and again, we have to really think about everything kind of hunting experiences are always complex and ambiguous. It's also about the animals. Because what happens is that when you went to one of these big hunts, and let's say these are usually these pressure hunts or driven hunts on wild boar, red deer, roe deer, and so on. And the hunt is over, and they all come back to a central place, and there's usually food waiting for the hunters, and kind of the animals are brought in, they are field dressed there. Once it's finished, they're put down on the ground on these twigs. They're all kind of prepared. They're lined up. So it's all kind of a matter of respect, basically, how you do that. And it's the time for hunters also to walk around, to see the animals being opened and field dressed, to look at the dead animals. And there's time. They spend time next to and with the dead animals lying around there. And then there's, of course, kind of the horn signals that are played and everything. So everyone gathers around the animals. Yeah. And they honor the animals with these different melodies that are played and so on. So it's actually what I would say, it's creating this time and space for hunters to think about what they've done and about the hunting day and about the deaths, because the dead animals, they're right there. Yeah. So they're spending a lot of time with the dead animal, not doing anything with it. They're just there. Yeah. And so if you get rid of these traditions, you're taking away at least the opportunity. I'm not saying that every hunter uses that opportunity in order to reflect, but you're basically taking away the opportunity actually to do that. Yeah, and in fact, I mean, what I have experienced in my research in Germany is it's one of the things at stake at the moment. Because, for example, with kind of the new kind of hunting that's coming up in Germany in recent years, there's a tendency to get rid of these rituals because it's they argue it's actually these are invented traditions, especially from Nazi Germany. And we don't really need it. It's really superficial. It's decorative, and we should think about the dead animal as potential meat. So as soon as we kill the animal, we have to start considering it as potential meat, and we have to deal with it in a way that is hygienic and that is similar to what they have in slaughterhouses, basically. Yeah. So for them, honoring the animal is by kind of ensuring that you can actually use the meat. And therefore, they would say that taking all this time and going through these rituals actually is a potential hygienic problem that might prevent you from using the dead animal as meat. And therefore, they don't want to do it. Yeah, so there are certain reasons why they have that. But what I would argue is the way they deal with animals is quite different from how traditional hunters in Germany do it, because they're not that much interested in establishing a relationship with the animal. For them, hunting is more kind of an intervention. And they deal with the living animal, and as soon as it's dead, it kind of ceases to be an animal and it's seen as and treated as meat. Whereas traditional hunters, they have this time in between, between living animal and meat. And so they spend time also with the dead animal. Yeah. And I think that's, in my view, it's quite important actually for establishing a relationship with the animal and to see an animal not just kind of as a potential meat provider, but also as a kind of a living being, basically. It's not to treat it as something with a soul. Of course, I mean, we have this older religious elements that are also part of hunting traditions in Central Europe. We have the traditions of Saint Hubert and also kind of the Christian Mass on the 3rd of November, for example, coming up in 2 days, actually. So there is this understanding that there's also, as I said earlier, with this poem, there's kind of God is also in that creature, and that's something that you can honor. But whether you have that religious outlook or not, which hardly any hunter does these days in Germany, it's still, they spend time with the dead animal. Yeah. And I think that's also an important part of an emotional experience, an emotional relationship to the animal when you hunt.
Wow. You explained that beautifully. And even though I was, or maybe I still am, on the side of like take care of the meat as quickly as possible, I appreciate your argument, and I'm less on that side now after you said, because I can appreciate and I can see the importance and, like you said, the opportunity to take time and reflect. And maybe some people have an opportunity and capacity to reflect that, reflect on that in some different settings. But like you said, if there is this ritual, then the opportunity for that reflection is kind of like a built-in into a process, and it's a part of a system. And I am a big system.
And of course, I mean, we shouldn't forget also, I mean, we're talking about hunting traditions or rituals, and we shouldn't think that there's kind of this one way and it's always been like that. Yeah, of course, I mean, yes, it's true. For example, in Germany, the Nazis really, they changed these traditions. They Nazified hunting traditions too. But this is not to say that they were the first to do them. Actually, they reworked the older traditions and changed them, adjusted them to their ideology. And in the same way, we could ask now, instead of asking, well, should we get rid of traditions or not, is to ask, well, can we adjust the traditions? Yeah. So, for example, when you want to kind of lie down kind of the animals in rows, but you're still thinking about you shouldn't spoil the meat. Are there ways how you can combine the two? Yeah. For example, what you often see is, when you have a bigger animal and you field dress it, and you need to leave the cavity open so that it cools out and bacteria can't really develop. So you might put a piece of wood in kind of into the cavity to hold it open so that it can cool out. So traditionally, this is not done when the animals are lined up. But I see it often now that people do that. Yeah, so they try both to think of the tradition and of thinking of the meat later on. So there are ways of how we could combine it.
Those things are seldom just like people tend to think that the previous folks who done it, they who invented it. But like you said, it started somewhere in the Ice Age. And then it was developed. And like you said, I'm a big proponent of, in general, this mindset of like, let's develop things forward rather than try to take them back to some place. Wow. Listen, Thorsten, this is one of the most fascinating discussions about hunting that I had on this podcast in a long time, maybe ever. So thanks for that. And folks who are listening to that, always remember, if you enjoy this sort of content, go to the description of the show and subscribe to my newsletter. The link is in the description. We're also going to link the paper, although it's not open access. But we're going to do it anyway. Yeah.
Well, one can view the document. It's open access. You just can't download it. But if you want to read it, you can do it with the link. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Yes. So that link will be in the description of the show. So subscribe to the newsletter, read the paper. And to close this off, Thorsten, I got to ask you about what would be your advice to hunters, how to talk about hunting, how to, deal with the social pressure that hunting is at the moment, and would the correct angle of that discussion be like, oh, hey, this is what we're going to lose if we're going to lose recreational hunting? Because I don't think that there will be, like during those discussion, the common theme is like, oh, hunting always going to be around as long as there are animals. But perhaps this is going to be like, trained sharpshooters, in air quotes, which is go at night and using night vision, control the numbers, right? Which is exactly not what we're talking about here. So how to talk about hunting if you're a hunter and if you're, sitting at the table with people who are maybe not stoked about hunting? What would be your advice?
It is difficult because, I mean, at least in Germany, but I also know it from kind of the research of my colleagues in other countries, is that kind of now in the 21st century, many hunters really feel on the defensive, like they need to justify what they are doing. And of course, this is also true because we have become more sensitized towards animal suffering and animal death. We ask kind of new questions about whether we should at all hunt and kill animals. There's kind of a strong movement of veganism, vegetarianism, and so on going on, especially now amongst the younger generations. So it's clear that, especially, I mean, and that's the problem of this term, recreational hunting. Yeah. So it's actually a term that, I mean, at least when you speak with hunters in Germany, is nothing that any hunter would use. The same like what you hear in an English-speaking context, sports hunting. No hunter in Germany would call hunting a sport because it has slightly different connotations in Germany. Sport for us is more like football, tennis, and so on. And you wouldn't kind of give the impression that you're trivializing hunting. So hunting is always something serious. But yeah, the problem is that in that kind of setting where you feel on the defensive and where there are good arguments basically about not killing animals. Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't forget that. Therefore, I say kind of killing animals should basically always be problematic. We should always be reflexive about why we do it, actually. And there may also be good arguments, actually, for not killing animals in certain circumstances. And I think this is kind of addressing this problems. That is something that hunters usually don't know how to do. Because the public debate is usually, should you kill animals or should you not? And of course, kind of it's a polarizing discussion. And of course, when you are on the side of the people who actually kill animals, you basically don't want to support the other side's arguments, but you want to speak against them. And this usually kind of has the negative effect that you present hunting as something that you do because you're interested in conservation or in maintaining the balance of the ecosystem and so on. And of course, I mean, that might somewhere be the case, but honestly, I mean, that's not why recreational hunters go hunting. Yeah, I mean, it's something else. Yeah. So how to bring that to the table without kind of trivializing it? Yeah. And I think the only way to do that is, and I think this is also something that many people probably could respect. And I also experienced that myself when I give public lectures on hunting, where also sometimes animal rights activists might be present, that usually they are okay at the end of my lecture, because I didn't claim that there is no problem. I didn't say there is no suffering in hunting. I don't claim that hunting is always good and should always be maintained and so on. But I'm trying to say, well, it's problematic. And it always has been, even kind of with our ancestors, even with the Neanderthals and so on. Hunting was always something problematic. But this is not to say that we shouldn't do it. Yeah, but it's really, and we have to say that as a society, we have decided together as a society that it's okay to do it. Yeah, and as long as this is the case, we can discuss about whether we want it or not. But as long as we're doing it, shouldn't we focus on how we do it and how we can do it in a way that is kind of respectful to the animals, but a way that is also has a positive effect on the hunters themselves. Yeah. And also on the whole hunting community, and perhaps also kind of for general society. Because, I mean, as we said earlier, the death of animals is usually something that disappeared from the public in the last decades. Yeah, so we have tried to separate the killing and the death of animals, even on farms, We all have kind of caged it in small containers. We have professionalized the killing of animals. We have reduced the number of people who actually do it, and we don't want to see it. Yeah. So maybe what a hunters could actually add to our public debates is that they bring the death of animals back into visibility. And although that might hurt, it might be a painful discussion, but maybe it also is a necessary discussion, because we confront the rest of society who probably really enjoys eating the meat produced by hunters, to face what else is involved and how it came about that they actually are in the position that they can actually eat meat. Yeah. So I think it takes some guts probably to make yourself vulnerable, basically, in saying, well, I kill, but also admitting how difficult it is, and that I'm not taking it easy, and that I'm also fine, perhaps, and that's one of the most difficult things, that I'm also fine kind of discussing the how of hunting with the rest of society. Because what happens at the moment, the big problem seems to be, at least in Germany, is that the public debates are usually between hunters and non-hunters. Yeah. So politics that impose hunting laws are usually they're imposing laws from outside of hunting, and all the hunters do is basically oppose these changes coming from outside. Yeah. But what if hunters could actually be part of the general discussion, and not just being defensive and not just trying to kind of quickly pass over that difficult thing of killing, but actually saying, yeah, that's what we do, and let's talk about how we do it properly, how we do it ethically, in a way that is not only just ethical for us, but also for a majority of our society. Yeah, of course, we can't appeal to the vegans and those who think that killing animals generally shouldn't be done, but at least let's have a kind of a discussion in society, and also kind of link up the ethical views of mainstream society with those of the hunting communities. Yeah, and this unfortunately is something that I don't see a lot of hunting communities do, especially not the hunting associations. The hunting associations, in my opinion, whether that's be kind of the local or the national ones here in Germany, or even FACE as a European hunting association, they don't like to discuss hunting ethics in public, because it's all a matter of kind of defending themselves. But I really should think they should take up that discussion, because there are things that go wrong in the hunting world. There are difficult developments going on. And if the hunting community themselves don't want to address them, then someone else from outside will do it. And I'm not sure that is a good thing.
Absolutely. Like, you hit a nail in the head. We should discuss those things, because otherwise other will discuss them for us. And that might not be the exact picture. Thorsten, listen, thank you so much for your insights and for your time. It's been great conversation. I'm sure the listeners learned a lot. Appreciate you.
Yeah, no problem. It was really fun talking with you.
And before you go, since you stick to the end of this show, then first and foremost, thank you so much for listening and for watching. And if you enjoy what I do here, and I presume you do since you listen to the very end, you should subscribe to my newsletter. The link is in the description of the show, newsletter.tommysoutdoors.com. So get in there, and you will get notifications not only about the latest episodes of the podcast, but also about everything else that is happening in the conservation and science world.